So in this video, we're going to cover characteristics of staph, and specifically we are going to start with activity 4-4, which is dealing with mannitol salt agar. At the end of this video, we will conclude with talking about a second test, which is referred to as the coagulase test. But first, we're going to start with our mannitol salt agar. And so we're going to look at day 1, which is going to be our setup day. So before we can talk about the setup for this experiment, we want to start by comparing and contrasting Staphylococcus versus Streptococcus. So if we compare Staphylococcus versus Streptococcus, so Staphylococcus is on the left, Streptococcus is on the right. Let's start with the shape. Well, notice the name Staphylococcus. Coccus tells you that they're cocci-shaped or they're spherical. Streptococcus is also a type of coccus, right? So its shape is also going to be cocci, which again is going to be a sphere. Now, if we talk about gram reactions, Staphylococcus is going to be gram-positive. Streptococcus, also gram-positive. So these are things that they have in common. They are both cocci-shaped, they're both spherical, and they are both gram-positive. So now let's look at some of the distinctions between the two. So if we look at arrangement, well, staphylo, right? Staphylo tells us the grape-like clusters. So the arrangement is going to be clusters. If we look at Streptococcus, strepto, remember, refers to chains. So this is bacteria that are in chains. In terms of where they're found in the body, for Staphylococcus, the main places that you're going to find this type of bacteria as part of normal flora would be the skin and the nasal passage. For Streptococcus, you're going to find this bacteria in the mouth, in the throat, in the vaginal area, as well as the gastrointestinal tract, otherwise known as the GI tract, the gut. In terms of their catalase reaction, remember when we talked about catalase, that catalase is an enzyme that organisms produce in order to neutralize hydrogen peroxide. And when they neutralize hydrogen peroxide, they're going to form water and oxygen. And we talked about that organisms that produce catalase are going to be organisms that use oxygen as their final electron acceptor. Because if they use O2 as their final electron acceptor, that means that they need to be able to neutralize hydrogen peroxide, which is going to form as a product. So for Staphylococcus, they are going to be catalase positive. And that's because these are facultative anaerobes. Remember, that means that they grow with or without oxygen, but grow better with oxygen. And that's because they actually use oxygen as their final electron acceptor. So because they use O2 as their final electron acceptor, they must have catalase. So they are catalase positive. Streptococcus, on the other hand, is catalase negative. It does not contain catalase because these bacteria are fermenters and they are aerotolerant anaerobes. And remember that means that they grow with or without oxygen, but that they don't use O2. So they can grow in the presence of oxygen, but they don't grow and use oxygen. And so as a result, because they don't use oxygen, they are catalase negative. You might recall when we talked about the effect of oxygen on bacterial growth, that instead of having catalase, aerotolerant anaerobes are going to have peroxidase. And peroxidase allows them to neutralize hydrogen peroxide because they do grow where oxygen is present, but they're not going to neutralize hydrogen peroxide and form oxygen. For organisms that are peroxidase positive, meaning they have peroxidase, they are going to break down hydrogen peroxide. And when they do that, they're just going to form water. They're not going to form more O2 because these organisms don't use O2 as their final electron acceptor. And so for Streptococcus, they are catalase negative. So one of the things that we will talk about is that if we need a rapid way to differentiate between staph and strep, One of the easiest and the fastest ways to differentiate if we're looking at a Staphylococcus or a Streptococcus would be to do a simple catalase test. And remember that that's a rapid test. All we do is we take our slide, we put our bacteria on there, we add hydrogen peroxide. If it bubbles, it's catalase positive. It's Staphylococcus. If it doesn't bubble, it's catalase negative, and it's Streptococcus. And you're going to see why that's important in a little bit when we talk later on about throat cultures. But for now, when we're comparing staph and strep, just be aware that Staphylococcus is catalase positive because they do use O2 as their final electron acceptor. Streptococcus is going to be catalase negative because they don't use O2 as their final electron acceptor. Now, in terms of their reaction to cold or dryness, Staphylococcus is going to be resistant, meaning it's not very sensitive to cold or dryness. If you think about it, the skin, for example, is a very dry place. So that bacteria must be able to be resistant to dryness. They're able to withstand that lack of water. In the case of Streptococcus, though, think of where they're located. Mouth, throat, vaginal area, GI tract, those are all very moist places. They are sensitive to dryness, meaning that if the environment that they're in is too dry, they're not able to grow. And so these organisms would be sensitive in terms of Streptococcus to cold or dryness. In terms of their salt tolerance, Staphylococcus, remember, grows on skin. If you think about when you sweat, your sweat, right, has a lot of salt in it. So in terms of Staphylococcus, they are going to be osmotolerant. They're able to tolerate high salt concentrations, whereas Streptococcus is not osmotolerant. It's not able to tolerate high salt concentrations. And so that's another distinction between them. Staphylococcus, osmotolerant. Streptococcus, not osmotolerant. And so this is just a little bit just kind of comparing how Staphylococcus and Streptococcus are similar and how they are different. The purpose of this lab is to look at Staphylococcus. The next lab, we will be focusing on Streptococcus, but this lab is going to focus on Staphylococcus for today. So now we're going to compare different species of Staphylococcus, and specifically we're going to compare Staph epidermidis versus Staph aureus. In terms of the percent of humans that carry it, for Staph epidermidis, 100% of people carry S. epidermidis, and that is part of normal flora. Everybody has it on your skin as part of your normal flora. In the case of Staph aureus is going to have approximately 25 to 30% of the population would carry Staph aureus. That percentage goes up if you work in the medical field. Medical workers have a population or percentage of people that have Staph aureus as part of their normal flora up to 50%. So up to all of healthcare workers, up to half of all healthcare workers carry Staph aureus as part of their normal flora. So this is a little bit different. In terms of pathogenicity, meaning are these bacteria pathogenic? Do they cause disease? So in the case of Staph epidermidis, it's not pathogenic. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because notice 100% of people carry Staph epidermidis. So this is a bacteria that typically, not always, there are special strains of this, but typically this bacteria would be non-pathogenic. Staph aureus, on the other hand, can be pathogenic. It's not always, right, because people do carry it as part of their normal flora, but it can be pathogenic. In terms of Staph epidermidis, normal flora, yes, this is part of people's normal flora. In terms of Staph aureus, while about a quarter to a third of the population is going to carry Staph aureus, 2/3 of the population are what we call transient carriers, meaning that they carry it sometimes. They don't always carry it, but they might carry it sometimes, and it might go away in other cases. So some people would be these transient carriers. Sometimes they carry it, other times they don't. In terms of their ability to ferment mannitol, mannitol is a type of sugar. Staph epidermidis does not ferment mannitol. Staph aureus does. So what that tells us is that fermentation of mannitol is one way that can be differential, right? Staph aureus ferments it, Staph epidermidis does not. So you're going to see in our MSA that the mannitol is actually going to be what we call a differential ingredient. It's going to allow us to differentiate between Staph epidermidis and Staph aureus. We also can look at what's called a coagulase reaction, and that is the ability of the bacteria to form a clot. For Staph epidermidis, it is coagulase negative. It doesn't form blood clots, whereas Staph aureus is going to be coagulase positive. So that's another way to differentiate between Staph aureus and Staph epidermidis. And in a little bit, we will talk about why is coagulase, why is that important? Why does Staph aureus have this? And what you're going to see is that it does play a role in its pathogenicity, its ability to cause disease. So we are going to start by talking about a variety of virulence factors that staph can have. So first, virulence. Virulence is referring to disease-causing ability. These are these proteins, for example, that can cause disease, meaning that they are what make the bacteria pathogenic. So the first virulence factor would be coagulase. And coagulase allows the bacteria to form clots. About 97% of Staph aureus would contain coagulase, meaning they would produce this virulence factor. The purpose of forming coagulase, or the purpose of the bacteria producing coagulase, is that when it forms a clot, it helps protect bacteria from the immune system. So let's say, for example, you get a cut and the bacteria gets into that wound, right? Well, when the bacteria gets into that wound, it's penetrated our first line of defense. And our first line of defense being our skin. Intact skin serves as a very good barrier. It helps to keep bacteria out. If we get a cut and we've now penetrated that barrier, now the bacteria can get into that wound and can get into the bloodstream, for example. Well, if you think about the bloodstream, that is often not a very favorable environment for bacteria, because also in the bloodstream are the white blood cells. And the white blood cells are your immune cells that are going to fight off foreign invaders. And so if the bacteria gets into the bloodstream, right, and it's being bombarded with these white blood cells, well, those white blood cells are going to destroy the bacteria. So one of the ways that Staph aureus can cause disease is that it produces this coagulase, this enzyme, and it forms a blood clot. And when it forms this clot, it's essentially making a barrier, and it's protecting the bacteria from the immune system. It's basically like walling itself off from the immune system. And so it's protecting the bacteria against the white blood cells. So 97% of Staph aureus would be coagulase positive. They would have this virulence factor that helps the bacteria to cause disease. The next virulence factor is going to be beta hemolysin. And the purpose of this virulence factor is that it's used to digest red blood cells and use the content for food and allows the bacteria to multiply. So basically, it's allowing the bacteria to have this alternative food source. It's using the red blood cells as a food source. So again, the purpose of this is to digest red blood cells for food. It's able to use those cells as a food source. Staphylokinase. Staphylokinase is another virulence factor, and the purpose of staphylokinase is to dissolve a clot. Now that might seem counterintuitive with what coagulase does, right? Notice that coagulase is going to form a clot. Staphylokinase is going to dissolve a clot. So do you think that bacteria produce these at the same time? And the answer is no. It's not going to make sense to produce these simultaneously at the same time. But it is an advantage for bacteria to produce one and then the other. If they produce coagulase first and they form a blood clot, well, that's going to protect that bacteria. But in that blood clot, the bacteria is going to be multiplying, and at some point, it's going to run out of resources. It's going to run out of food, and it's going to need to spread. And so after it forms the blood clot, once it's run out of food and it's run out of its availability of resources, it's now going to produce staphylokinase. It's going to dissolve that blood clot, and that's going to allow it to disseminate within the body. And so it allows for spread to neighboring tissues. So this allows the bacteria to invade into neighboring tissues. And so again, it's going to produce coagulase first. It's going to form a blood clot, protect the bacteria from the immune system. And then when resources become limited, the bacteria is going to produce this staphylokinase, which is going to dissolve that clot. And it allows for dissemination or spread of the bacteria to neighboring tissues. And so these are just some of the virulence factors that staph can have. So next, we're going to look at the levels of a staph infection. And so there are varying degrees of different types of staph infection. One of the most common is going to be skin type infections, because remember that staph is part of normal flora of the skin. So the first level would be our folliculitis, which is a pimple. This is going to be an infected hair follicle. So many of you have probably experienced this at some point. And if you get that infected hair follicle, that is again referred to as folliculitis. If we get an abscess is a localized region of pus surrounded by inflamed tissue. So in this case, the tissue might be red and swollen, and it has pus. We can have what's referred to as a furuncle or a boil, and this has multiple local focal points of infection. So it's not just a simple one hair follicle, it actually is multiple hair follicles, multiple points of infection. And so this is going to be kind of a larger mass of infection. We can also get what's called a carbuncle, which becomes subcutaneous, meaning it penetrates the epidermis. It goes deep into the tissues, and this will lead to a fever. And that fever is a result of the inflammatory response, which we will learn more about in our immunology chapter. And so this is where the bacteria starts to kind of penetrate. It goes through the epidermis, and it starts to go deep into the tissues, into the dermal layer, and it forms this carbuncle. We can also have it progress to become systemic, meaning that it goes on to be bloodborne. And if it is bloodborne and it's in the bloodstream, that can lead to a condition called sepsis. And that can be very, very dangerous. It can be fatal if left unchecked. And so this would be if the bacteria is infecting the bloodstream. And so it is going all throughout the body, and it can infect multiple sources. We can also have staph causing pneumonia, which is going to cause a fluid buildup in the lungs. It can also cause necrotizing fasciitis, which is flesh-eating disease, where the bacteria is going to degrade the skin. Staph causes about 25% of all flesh-eating bacterial cases. The remainder is typically going to be streptococcus, which we will talk about later, Streptococcus pyogenes, for example. But staph can also cause necrotizing fasciitis or flesh-eating disease, as well as it is the common cause of food poisoning. And so people don't often think about staph as being a cause of food poisoning, but in fact it actually is. So it also can lead to food poisoning or foodborne illness. So now let's get into how do we identify if the bacteria we're looking at is Staph aureus. So our assay for this is going to be our mannitol salt agar, which we call MSA. And the purpose of the MSA is to presumptively identify Staphylococcus aureus and to select for the growth of salt-tolerant bacteria. So in this test, we are trying to presumptively identify. Remember, that means that is about a 95% confidence that it is Staph aureus. It's not 100%, it's presumptive. We will talk later about the confirmatory test. But for now, we're going to talk about MSA, which is our presumptive test. So we need to start by talking about what is in MSA agar. What is in mannitol salt agar? So the first ingredient is going to be our beef extract and our peptones. And we've discussed that these ingredients are used as food for general growth. They're there to help support bacterial growth. Next, we have sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is in the media at a 7.5% salt concentration. Typical media has about 1% salt. So notice that in this case, the salt concentration is much, much higher. And as a result, because the salt concentration is higher, this is an ingredient that is going to be selective, and it's selective for osmotolerant organisms, meaning that organisms that are osmotolerant are able to grow, and organisms that are not osmotolerant are not able to grow on this high salt. So this is a higher than usual salt concentration, and that salt, again, is going to be our selective ingredient. We are selecting for organisms that are osmotolerant. So if we think back to when we compared staph and strep, we would expect that staph would grow on an MSA. Strep would not, because strep is not osmotolerant, right? But if we think back to comparing Staphylococcus species, we would expect that Staph epidermidis and Staph aureus would both grow on the plate. But we might want to know if it's Staph aureus or is it Staph epidermidis, because Staph epidermidis is not pathogenic and Staph aureus is. So in addition to having a selective ingredient, we also need a differential ingredient. We need an ingredient that will allow us to differentiate Staphylococcus aureus from other osmotolerant organisms. And our differential ingredient in this case is going to be our D-mannitol. D is just the form of the sugar. It's the isomer of the sugar. And again, remember, our mannitol is our sugar. So this is in the media as your differential ingredient. And the purpose is that bacteria will ferment it to produce acids. And if the bacteria ferments it, then it's going to produce those acids and therefore would be presumptive Staph aureus, because remember we said that Staph aureus is able to ferment mannitol. Staph epidermidis does not. This is why this ingredient is differential. It's differential because it allows us to differentiate Staph aureus from Staph epidermidis. But we need a way to detect if the acids are produced. And so in this media, we also have our phenyl red. We have seen phenyl red multiple times throughout the semester. You all know that phenyl red is going to be a pH indicator. Remember that the pH indicator, if we look at the name, the phenyl red, the red or pink, tells you that it's alkaline. Remember that in the name, the color is the alkaline. The acidic, remember, is yellow in every case except methyl red. So in phenyl red, remember, yellow is acidic. Bromothymol blue, yellow is going to be acidic. Bromocresol purple, yellow is acidic. So for phenyl red, it's our pH indicator. Pink is going to be alkaline, pink or red. Yellow is going to be acidic. So these are the ingredients that are in our mannitol salt agar. So now let's look at what our results would tell us if we see different results on our MSA agar. So when we do this experiment, we would have you collect your own sample. You would actually get to test to see if you are a carrier of Staph aureus. So this is actually usually a very fun activity for students to do because they like to see, are you part of that 1/4 to 1/3 that carries Staph aureus as part of your normal flora? And so remember that I said that one of the places that we can find this bacteria would be skin, nasal passage, also in the groin area sometimes we can find this. So when we do this experiment, typically we would have you swab your nose. Now, we're not talking the really far up swab like that you see with the COVID test. That's not it. It's simply just inserting a swab into the inside of your nose and rubbing it around the nasal passage to collect the bacteria that are in the nose. So the way that we would do this experiment is we would take a sterile swab and we would open the container. In the lab, we typically use glass test tubes that have a lid, and the swab has been sterilized. And so you would open that tube and you would take out your sterile swab. When we open our water bottle, we want to keep the lid in our hand just like we would for any other tube, because we don't want to set that cap down or the water that we're using is no longer going to be sterile. So when we use our sterile water, we take our palm face up, just like we would if we were removing any type of cap from a tube, and we would open the lid for the water bottle, keeping that lid between our pinky and our ring finger. Again, just like we would for any other tube. So we take the cap and we put it between our pinky and our ring finger. We would flame the opening of the bottle because, again, we want to keep that sterile water sterile. We would dip the swab into the bottle. So we would get it wet. Then we take it out. We reflame the opening of the bottle. And then we put the cap back on. So now we have our swab. And in our swab, we have sterile water. We take that swab and now we would rub it on the inside of our nose. And so we would try and pick up bacteria from the nasal passage. Once we do that, we need to streak for isolation because we can't just put bacteria all over this plate because we're going to have a mixture of different types of bacteria. You're going to have potentially multiple different types of bacteria that could be found in your nasal passage. And so we would need to do our streak plate. We need to streak for isolation. And so what we would do, the red is representing the swab. So we would take that swab that we had already rubbed in our nose, and we would take that swab, and in quadrant 1, we just kind of roll it along quadrant number 1. And we repeat that several times. And so we rub our swab, again, that's the red. We rub our swab on quadrant number 1. And then once we do that, we are done. We are done with our swab. So we would put our swab back into the glass test tube that it's in, and we would put that in our biohazard. Now, once we've added our bacteria to our plate with our swab, then we would simply use our loop and finish our streak plate technique. So we would flame our loop, we would let it cool. Remember that in quadrant number 1, we're streaking for, in quadrant 1, we are streaking for a lawn. So we are just going to go back and forth, and when we do this, we are going to try to fill in that first quadrant. So we are going to make our lawn in quadrant number 1. After we make our lawn, remember that we're going to flame our loop. We are going to let it cool. Then we do our 6 to 8 directional streaks into quadrant 2. After we do that, we take our loop, we reflame it, we allow it to cool. After it cools, in quadrant 3, we're going to do our 6 to 8 directional streaks. We do not flame between quadrants 3 and 4. We are simply going to take our loop, pull bacteria from quadrant 3 out, go back in. Pull out, go back in, and then we're just going to zigzag down into the open space, making sure not to hit any of our earlier streaks. And so this is going to lead to our streak plate. And this streak plate, again, is going to contain bacteria from the nasal passage. And so we would have this plate. After we would inoculate it, then we would put our lid on. We would take that plate, put it agar side up in the incubator, in the 37-degree incubator for 48 hours. And after 48 hours, we would take our plate out and we would look at what grew to see what type of bacteria was found in our nasal passage. And so now we're going to talk about what the results would look like of this experiment. So we're going to look at our readout now for our mannitol salt agar. So again, the purpose of our mannitol salt agar is to presumptively identify Staph aureus and select for the growth of osmotolerant bacteria. So let's discuss what the results could mean. So if you look at a plate of MSA, you can see that on the top of that plate, we have our yellow. And that yellow in the agar, remember, let's talk about a few things about this plate. So again, any bacteria that grows on this plate, we know has to be osmotolerant because we have a selective ingredient on the plate. And our selective ingredient is going to be our high salt concentration, 7.5% salt. So anything that grows is definitely osmotolerant. So we have two results. The bacteria grew and the agar is yellow. Or the bacteria grew and the agar is pink-red. So let's start with our yellow. So remember that in MSA, we have our pH indicator. And our pH indicator, remember, is phenyl red. Yellow tells us that phenyl red is going to be acidic. So what that tells us about this organism is that it grew, which means that it's osmotolerant. And we know that there's an acidic pH. The pH became acidic, which is why it turned yellow. So let's think about what would make the pH become acidic. And the answer is that the bacteria metabolized the mannitol. It used the mannitol for food. And remember that when we use sugar, it's going to produce acidic products. Those acidic products are going to lower the pH, and it's going to cause the phenyl red to turn yellow. So yellow is acids. That tells us that the mannitol was fermented. Remember that our mannitol is our differential ingredient. It allows us to differentiate Staph aureus from Staph epidermidis. And so if it fermented the mannitol, it is presumptive Staph aureus. Remember that Staph aureus is pathogenic. And so in our MSA test, that would be considered our positive. So this is positive on MSA. That is presumptive identification for Staph aureus. It is not confirmatory. It's not 100%, but it has about a 95% confidence. It could be a type of bacteria called Micrococcus. Micrococcus is another skin type bacteria. It's found on the skin. It's non-pathogenic though. And so to confirm that in fact it is Staph aureus, we do a confirmatory test. And that confirmatory test is going to be our coagulase test. Because remember that about 97% of all Staph aureus is going to be coagulase positive. That's the one that's going to make the bacteria pathogenic. So Micrococcus would be coagulase negative, while Staph aureus would be coagulase positive. So yellow agar, we know that the bacteria is osmotolerant. We know that the pH is acidic, which tells us that bacteria fermented the mannitol and produced the acidic products. Again, presumptive identification for Staph aureus. And so in the MSA, this is what we would call our positive. The positive would be that the yellow agar occurs. Now, that's not to be confused with yellow colonies, meaning that the bacteria that are growing on the plate have yellow colonies. It has to be yellow agar, which means that acids are being produced by the bacteria. It's not just the pigment that the bacteria produces. Let's talk about what does red or pink agar tell us. So if we see this bottom result, notice the bacteria grew, which means that it is osmotolerant, right? It's osmotolerant because it grew. In the case of the pink or red, that is going to be an alkaline pH. So again, it grew, produces an alkaline pH. If it produced an alkaline pH, did the bacteria metabolize the sugar? And the answer is no, because if it used the sugar, it's going to produce acidic products. This pH is alkaline. So it didn't use the sugar, so what would you guess it uses as its food source? So if it doesn't use sugar, what's its backup? What's its other choice? And the answer is bacteria did not metabolize the mannitol, but instead metabolized the peptones. And remember that when peptones are metabolized, it produces alkaline products. It's going to raise the pH, and the MSA agar is going to turn pink or red. In this case, it could be Staphylococcus epidermidis. Again, this bacteria would be non-pathogenic, and in this test, this would be considered a negative because we're trying to presumptively identify Staph aureus. If it's pink, it's not fermenting the mannitol, in which case it's not Staph aureus. So in this case, it could be Staph epidermidis, and it's non-pathogenic. So that is going to be our negative. No growth. It's possible that we get no growth. What does that tell us if we get no growth? Well, that tells us no growth equals not osmotolerant, meaning there are not osmotolerant bacteria present. Again, this would be considered a negative. It's not Staph aureus. Now, there's a question in the question set, and it asks that why would you do, in addition to doing an MSA, why would you do a nutrient agar control plate as a control? So what that means is that if we are to streak our nasal passage, it's a good idea to streak our nasal passage or to swab our nasal passage and do a streak plate on both an MSA and on a nutrient agar. And the nutrient agar serves as a comparison. Because remember, the MSA agar, the only thing that can grow are bacteria that are osmotolerant. It doesn't tell you whether there's no bacteria in the nasal passage. It only tells us if osmotolerant bacteria are present. So by taking a swab and also swabbing on a nutrient agar plate, it serves as a comparison to look at all bacteria growth. So if we got no growth on an MSA, the only conclusion we can make is that there's no osmotolerant bacteria. If we take our swab and we put it on nutrient agar and we get no growth, then there's no bacteria. So a nutrient agar plate is just a comparison for all bacteria. Because again, the only thing that's going to grow on MSA is going to be osmotolerant bacteria. So we would do a nutrient agar plate as a control, as a comparison for all bacterial growth. And so it's possible that you get on your MSA plate no growth, which is there's no osmotolerant bacteria there. Again, that's a negative because there is no Staph aureus. So here are just some different examples for you to see these actual bacteria on the plate. So what we have is on the right, we have Staph aureus. And notice that when you look at Staph aureus on this plate, that the agar is yellow. Because again, Staph aureus is osmotolerant. It's able to tolerate the high salt that's on this plate, so it grows. The agar being yellow means that the agar is acidic. Remember that phenol red, acidic is yellow. So the pH is going to be acidic, and the pH is acidic because the bacteria fermented the mannitol. And when it uses that sugar, it's going to produce acidic products, which causes the phenol red to turn yellow. So that is presumptive Staph aureus. And again, this is Staph aureus. We purposely inoculated this plate with Staph aureus to show you this. We inoculated the plate with Staph epidermidis. Notice that the bacteria grows because, again, it is osmotolerant, so it does grow, but the agar is still pink. The agar is still pink because Staph epidermidis does not ferment mannitol, but instead uses peptones to grow. And when it uses peptones, it produces the alkaline products. And that's why the fennel red stays pink red. On the left, you can see that we streaked for E. coli. And notice that E. coli does not grow. We don't see any growth on in this plate. And that's because E. coli is not osmotolerant. So it's not going to grow on MSA because MSA has high salt as the selective ingredient. This is just to show you some student examples of what a MSA plate might look like if you do this experiment. And so what you can see here, this is a student whose plate definitely tests positive for presumptive Staph aureus. Notice how the bacteria grew and the agar is yellow, which tells us that, in fact, this is presumptive Staph aureus. The student on the right has growth. There are osmotolerant bacteria in their nasal passage, but that the nasal passage, the agar is staying pink, which means that it is not positive for Staph aureus. It has possibly Staph epidermidis because we see growth, but not yellow. And the not yellow is because they didn't use the mannitol. Instead, they used the peptones, and the peptones produce the alkaline products. And so if you look closely at these, you can see a variety of different types of colonies here. Even out here, you can see there's a difference in these colonies. And that's because you have to think about that when you're looking at these plates, there's not just one type of bacteria in the nasal passage. There are likely multiple types, and you're going to see that on a plate. And so that's why it's so important to streak for isolation, so that you can end up with these isolated colonies. And you can see this one has a yellow halo, this one has a yellow halo. So if I wanted to do future studies on this, that I could have these isolated colonies, and that is one type of bacteria that's on that colony. If I were to take in the lawn, well, there's multiple types of bacteria. Some of these could be MSA positive, some might be MSA negative. But we do have isolation, and so we could study these, and you can see that this one is positive, this one is not. So this would be a bacteria that would be selected for a confirmatory test. Because remember that when we look at an MSA plate, yellow is presumptive Staph aureus. It's not confirmatory. If we want to confirm, in fact, that it is Staph aureus, we need our confirmatory test, which remember that I mentioned is going to be coagulase. So we would actually use this colony, we would pick up this colony to inoculate a coagulase test to see if, in fact, it is Staph aureus. Because if it's coagulase positive, that would be then confirmatory for Staph aureus. This is only presumptive. We would need to take it a step further to confirm if, in fact, it is Staph aureus. And so that's going to be the second half of this, is going to be talking about our confirmatory test, which is going to be our coagulase test. And so the last part of this video is looking at activity 5-27, which is going to be our coagulase test. So the purpose of our coagulase test is to test whether bacteria produce coagulase like Staph aureus. So this would be our confirmatory test after an MSA agar. So again, if we have a positive on our MSA, that MSA is only presumptive. So we need to do a confirmatory test, and our confirmatory test is going to be our coagulase test. So let's talk about how our coagulase test works. So in this test, our substrate is going to be our fibrinogen. And fibrinogen is a clotting factor that is liquid, and the source of it in this experiment is going to be rabbit plasma. So what that means, the plasma is the liquid part of the blood. So not including the red blood cells, the white blood cells, it's the liquid component of the blood. in that liquid component is going to be the clotting factors. That plasma is going to have these clotting factors that allow a blood clot to form. And so our fibrinogen is going to be our substrate. And so this is what can be used as a clotting factor. Now, if bacteria produce coagulase, they will take the fibrinogen that's in the blood, that's in the plasma, and they will take that fibrinogen and they will produce this fibrin clot. And this fibrin clot you're going to see is going to be a solid. So we are going to end up with a product that is solid. So it's going to go from a liquid to being a solid. Now, coagulase is going to be an exoenzyme. It's an enzyme that is secreted by the bacteria, but is going to be released outside the cell. That makes sense, right? Because the bacteria wants to form the clot around it. It's not going to help if the coagulase stays inside the bacterial cell. So this enzyme that bacteria can produce, this coagulase, is an exoenzyme. Staph aureus would produce it. It would secrete it out of its cell and into the bloodstream. And when it puts it in the blood, it's going to take that fibrinogen that's in the blood and it's going to produce that fibrin clot. And remember that the purpose of that fibrin clot is that it's going to protect the bacteria from the immune system. And so again, what is our source of fibrinogen in our experiment? Well, our media that we're using in this case is going to be our rabbit plasma. And in that rabbit plasma contains the fibrinogen. And so if the bacteria is positive for coagulase, it's going to take that liquid, it's going to take that fibrinogen, and it's going to produce this fibrin clot, which is going to be a solid. So this would be an example of what it would look like after. Notice that in this one, this is a liquid. When you turn the tube on its side, it's a liquid. If you see this, where it stays a solid, that means that bacteria did produce coagulase, and the solid would be our positive. So this is our positive. This is where we have our fibrin clot forming, because this bacteria did produce coagulase, and it formed this clot outside of the bacteria, which again is why coagulase is an exoenzyme. And so it produces this fibrin clot, which makes this to be a solid. If it is still liquid, that is negative for coagulase. Negative because it didn't form the clot. It does not have coagulase. It's not able to take the fibrinogen that's in the plasma and convert it into a fibrin clot. So this is our assay for our confirmatory test. So what we would do in this experiment would be that we would have you guys work in pairs. And when you work in pairs, you and your partner would get 3 rabbit plasma tubes. So you would get 3 tubes that contain the rabbit plasma, because again, in that rabbit plasma is the fibrinogen. It contains the substrate. 2 of the tubes would serve as a control. They would serve as a comparison. 1 of the tubes you would inoculate with pure Staph aureus. So we would have you take a plate that contains Staph aureus, and you would use a heavy inoculum. So a big clump of bacteria, because this is also a rapid test. This can be done in as little as 2 hours. So you take your Staph aureus, you pick it up with your sterile loop, and you would inoculate your rabbit plasma. You would repeat this using a pure culture of Staph epidermidis. These are our controls. Staph aureus we expect should be positive. It should form a solid clot. Staph epidermidis would be negative. This should still be a liquid. And then any students that had a possible positive on their MSA, like that one colony I showed you, you would, if you had a plate, if you had your MSA plate and it had an isolated colony that has yellow agar, you would use a sterile loop, pick up that colony in question, the one that we think is presumptive Staph aureus, and we would inoculate the rabbit plasma with that possible positive. And then we would look at this tube and see, when we came back, we would see, did this tube have a positive for a coagulase test? Was this a solid or was it a liquid? If we come back and we look at this tube, this possible MSA positive, if we look at this tube and it formed a clot, well, that's confirmatory for Staph aureus, because the clot is because the bacteria has coagulase. If, on the other hand, we come back and we look at this after the incubation period and we see that it is still liquid, well, it's not confirmatory for Staph aureus. In that case, it could be Micrococcus, for example. So the coagulase test, again, is our confirmatory test for Staph aureus. It allows us to determine if our possible positive on MSA, because again, MSA is presumptive, 95% confidence. If we take that possible positive and we inoculate a coagulase test and it comes out to be coagulase positive, well, that is now confirmatory for Staph aureus. And so we would have you, once you inoculate these tubes, you would put them in a rack in the front of the classroom, not in the cans, simply because if we were doing this, these tubes are teeny, teeny, tiny. And so if we put them in the cans, they get lost. So we have you put them in this rack in the front and we would incubate them. And then after the incubation time, you would look at your tubes and see whether or not you saw a solid in that tube. And so this is just to show you what those results would look like. So this is the result for a pure Staph aureus culture, one that we inoculated with Staph aureus. And you can see that when we turn the tube on its side, that the liquid doesn't move, and that's because it's no longer liquid. Staph aureus is present. It produces coagulase. The coagulase is taking that fibrinogen that was in the rabbit plasma, and it's producing that fibrin clot. And that fibrin clot is now a solid. This is what Staph aureus would look like. Staph epidermidis, however, is coagulase negative. Because remember, Staph epidermidis is not pathogenic. It's not pathogenic, therefore it doesn't produce coagulase. It doesn't form those blood clots. So in that case, if you look at this tube, it's still a liquid. That tells you that it's coagulase negative. It was not able to produce that fibrin clot. And so it's coagulase negative. And so this would be our follow-up test if we were trying to confirm Staph aureus. So after MSA, any possible positives that we have on our MSA would be followed up with a coagulase to confirm whether or not it is in fact Staph aureus. And if it is coagulase positive, that is going to be confirmatory for Staph aureus. And so this now concludes our video on Staphylococcus, talking about the MSA and the coagulase test.